Right, so a big welcome to our Privasec broadcast series, and this is just the first of many episodes to come. So every different episode, we will host this over the next few weeks during lunchtime, and it's really a short, concise session where you'll get to hear from different SMEs on different topics, and it's also an opportunity for you to come with your questions, to use our SMEs as a soundboard, right, on various topics that you might be interested. So today is really interesting because we will be talking about the Gatecrashers before COVID situation for those who love organizing big parties, and the bigger the parties, the better, for socializing, right? But most of the times, how many of you know actually who are the Gatecrashers in your parties? Who are the Gatecrashers that you have invited to your home unknowingly, maybe through a friend of a friend and a friend of a friend? And in this context, the Gatecrashers really is, we're talking about our third-party risk, right? And it's about knowing them. So before we dive into that, and before I introduce our guest speaker here with us today, Swapnil, just a little quick introduction to Privasec and who we are and what we are about. First and foremost, my name is Shamane Tan. I am your host for today. I'm also the Privasec Chief Growth Officer, where I really work with executives on helping them to bridge their business gaps and looking at incorporating cyber risk as part of their strategy. So Privasec, we do a lot of work in this industry, specializing in cybersecurity, consulting services. Governance, risk, and compliance is a core area where we've been helping organizations uplift their security posture. We also have a brilliant team, which is the Red team, where they do a lot of exciting pieces of work, where we do ethical hacking, we do red teaming, purple teaming, really exciting bunch of people. And then we have our third division as well, which is a drone security. And that's where we do drone forensic, threat intelligence. So it's a really interesting group of people as well. And we hope to be able to invite them to our sessions one of these days. And we are also on YouTube. So feel free to subscribe to our Privasec team YouTube videos. This session is going to be there as well, so you can share with your network or with your friends. So without further ado, I just want to introduce Swapnil. So he is our senior security consultant. He's very experienced in the GRC space. He's done a lot of work with our clients when it comes to meeting their compliance regulations, requirements, and also especially in the vendor assessments, process improvements. Swapnil, if I've missed out anything, feel free to add in.
Oh, that's fine. Well, I'll probably introduce myself as well. My name is Swapnil Aglawe, like Shamane said, a senior consultant with the Privasec GRC team based out of Melbourne. Now, in my experience, I've obviously worked across industries, and which also includes significant time in the New South Wales government space. So, obviously spend some time, and I guess I'd be able to share a few details and my thoughts on how we kind of track our Gatecrashers and make sure that we are secure during that process.
Sounds good, and that's a perfect way to just dive right into this first question. So very curious to find out from you, in terms of all the work you've done so far, what's your observation of the industry trends these days when it comes to managing your third parties?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, a lot of things have changed. Over the years, over the past 6-7 years, I've been in the industry, and interesting observations and I guess conversations I've had, and in the last few months, in fact, about vendor risks and how we do assessments exactly. And interestingly, I've seen a kind of a change in attitude, change in approach. Traditionally, what the traditional approach was to basically go after vendors or track vendor risks who have access to our networks and information systems. But now I'm seeing a change or trend where now organizations are going overboard and kind of tracking other the vendors who also kind of hold information, maybe not actively, but have some information and hold the information. I'll probably give an example here, and this is like quite recent, where a logistic organization or from that industry reached out to their engineering services vendor, asking them to provide like a questionnaire where they had to answer their information security posture and things like that. And luckily, obviously the team weren't ready enough with that information. They were not sure what it means basically. But I think what it kind of gives us an idea is that the industry is going beyond the traditional approach. They want to know how their information, even if they are processing or like not even processing, but even producing information for them, right? Example, like I said, logistics, industries, they design like engineering services, like the example I took, they design their automation solutions. They have an ongoing maintenance regime, and they want to know now how their designs, for example, the solution design I was referring to, are stored and dealt with. So what are your access controls, and so on and so forth. And so I had a friend reach out to me, in fact, when he was presented with that questionnaire. And interestingly, we obviously discussed, a couple of, other areas. And then interestingly, it appeared to me that they even did not have a dedicated IT team to support, that process. So it was quite interesting to see, logistic industry, they are kind of going on board. Traditionally, you'd expect only tech companies being involved, like, who are managing their networks and information systems. But it's good to see like a welcome change. Finance industries, obviously, they are, heavily regulatory driven. So you'd expect a certain amount of maturity anyway. But logistics industries, going out and, kind of going on board, I guess, to assess and understand how their information is handled is quite, I guess, appreciative. So I think to summarize the comment, I'd say there is an encouraging trend in the industry when it comes to being aware of your cyber risks and vendor risks, especially, and how they are dealt with as well. So
that's really good. And then which leads on, actually, I want to find out from you, like, how do you define a company as having a mature vendor security assessment framework?
Yeah, so like, obviously maturity would be obviously, be driven, I think, and I believe maturity is quite driven by, your resources, how capable are you and how well funded you are, right? So, and I think, again, there are two extremes to it. I mean, it's not a solution, it's not a one way, like, it's going to work for everyone. So you've got to have, some creative, activities, put into your vendor risk assessments. I'll probably use some examples that kind of appeared to me in my recent interactions with some of my clients, where they actually have a threat intel platform, right? They have a threat intel platform to monitor their vendors. So they actually, the client basically said, we went out to our vendors and, because they had a breach where some information of this particular organization was obviously put out there, right? And the information, obviously, they did their due diligence. They assessed that the information is not really like that critical, but hey, it's still our information. They went out to the vendor and they kind of said, hey, look, mate, this is serious. Like, obviously, you got to tidy this up. Provide us with, what are the remediation actions that you have performed, and so, kind of an assurance that it won't happen again. And what it tells me is basically, right, they are aware that, hey, like, maybe a persistent threat actor can join the dots. They can potentially leverage that information. And hey, mind you, this particular, vendor, he wasn't having access to this, like in their network or information system. This was separately. Probably he did, or the vendor did some work for this particular organization. So, and that led to, this breach, but quite, I guess, appreciative. And they're well funded, obviously, this organization. I guess second example is where, some organizations, they kind of do not have enough resources, let's say, to do a vendor assessment or assess, the risk. Now, they're aware that the risk exists, but hey, they're not doing like, regular assessment. So, for example, now I'd probably use an example here again. A lot of organizations, they're based out of a commercial, commercial complex where, building management also becomes one of your vendors, right? And so it was critical, obviously, that you rely on certain controls, that they apply, physical controls, and that's fine, right? They transferred the risk, they were managing the risk, and all good. But this client, they went overboard again, right? They went and like, I'm gonna put these controls to test, right? So obviously, right then to the FOIA, try to get access, they failed. They went over to the loading dock and they actually socially engineered their way over to the physical premises, right? And they actually got into the office, right? So that actually, is a creative thinking, I would say, right? They do not have resources to maybe employ or a raid team, a dedicated raid team to do like a physical penetration testing, but hey, they did something. And I think a good thing that came out of this was the building management was quite appreciative, and they actually took the recommendations on board. I guess further enhancing the security posture for obviously the rest of the customers they had located in that building. So quite encouraging there as well. And I guess towards the end, there are some clients or there's some organizations who are actually struggling to even list out what are our vendors. So the maturity obviously differs for every organization, but I think I'd like to think there's an upward trend on when they are. I guess I've seen a lot of organizations who are trying to now put their foot into this vendor risk area and trying to assess, vendor assessment. So like, quite a welcome change, but the maturity, I guess to summarize, the maturity is quite obviously, all over the place, obviously.
Yeah, it definitely varies as well across different industries, right?
Correct,
And
exactly.
also, how much the organization is as a whole when in terms of their like their outlook on risk and cyber
Correct.
risk, and also the culture of the company. So that makes a lot of difference. And just now you mentioned something
Definitely.
interesting where it shows a company having the foresight where they have looked at really interesting products. So maybe can you just
Yeah,
elaborate
yeah.
on what are the upcoming product offerings maybe you have seen in this landscape that would be
Yeah, I have.
interesting?
I have had obviously, quite I think interesting product demos in the past couple of months now. I'm not an expert obviously in this area as yet, but I see a
Yeah.
lot of organizations taking that on board to I guess digest or get that information feed and from these data points as well of what are the vendors doing another data point I guess to assess their vendor risk, right? I think there was a product it was there I think Recorded Future was one of them, and they actually have a module to kind of monitor your third party risk, right, which is quite nice. And so, and obviously the capabilities would enhance in future, but it's good to know that we've got something like this, right, and which will obviously grow over time. So
Yeah.
quite a yes, appreciative change, I guess, in the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just yesterday I was with the CIO of Toll Group, and he was
Yeah,
talking about lessons learned, right, from being
yeah,
attacked twice this year. And he talked about really, the importance about being forward-looking, and then they're looking at gauging threat intelligence, help them
yeah,
monitor third parties as well. And they've already been on board in terms of that journey, and now they are focusing on building their cyber resilience program and all. So there are
right,
many bits that we need to look at to bring all of that together to
correct,
really
yeah.
the whole company's.
And obviously, I think a lot of organizations have actually adopted, well after the toll, the entire cybersecurity event and incident happened. So I've had at multiple clients, right? I've had the leadership teams, right, and the board been asking
Mm,
questions to the cybersecurity teams of, hey, what are you doing about it? What have we done? Right, what are we doing? And so I see that kind of, I guess, toll definitely got a ball rolling in the industry, in this area. And so that's why I said, probably the logistic the organization that I was speaking about, they are wanting to know what they exactly, their vendors exactly doing with their information, right? So I
mm.
completely relate, I think, where it's coming, but yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely really important.
Mm.
And now, what about companies, right? That they are seemingly
Mm.
aware of the
Yeah,
vendor risk, and they seem to have things in order. But what are the gaps you are still seeing in the industry for companies like that?
right, right. Now there are obviously, I mean, again, I won't necessarily say gaps, but I would, usually would take it as an opportunity of improvement. I'm quite an advocate of, continual improvement.
Love
Like I
that
think
continuous improvement.
yeah, exactly, right. Because the organizations have done their part. They've put some program in place. Maybe it's not perfect. Nobody's going to get, I guess, and it stands for, I guess, any information security program. You're not going to get 100%, or you're not going to get a perfect program in the first place, right? It's going to be a learning journey. You've got to, fine tune it as we go. Kind of adopt to the changing dynamics in the industry. Adopt to your vendors, right? As and when they change, right? So not necessarily a gap there, but I definitely, to that point, I think like to emphasize on certain areas. I think that I've over the years I've raised questions. I like to ask questions, so I raise questions, right? And that's my job. So when I'm talking to the clients, I mean, what are you doing exactly, right? I mean, for example, let's talk about notification of data breach, right? It's quite, it made a headline, obviously, and it pretty much is a line item in each and every contract we pretty much have with our vendors, right? Especially SaaS providers and similar. And I think obviously the vendors also having that included in their contracts. But hey, did you kind of understand, I think, as an organization, of what their process looks like, right? Is it aligned to what you expect? What happens if their process kind of, puts out the data or like the, I guess, notification out there before you are able to even reach out to your customers, right? Will it cost, a reputation loss, right? And did you think about that risk? So it's about, again, how the organization kind of ensures that they are exactly aware of, what the vendor is doing, right? And so, I think this again, this is an interesting conversation I had with one of my clients, right? So obviously they've got a process, legal team reviews it and stuff like that. They might not know the details, what are important. So I can, I guess, in that case, I said, maybe information security team can maybe work with them to kind of, provide some SME in that space, right? Of what is important and what is not, right? So I guess that's another thing I've had previously, a lot of conversations in that area, similar
Mm.
to maybe a small, medium organizations when I'm doing assessments on the vendors, right? They'd have a key management process, they'd have fancy stuff, all in the cloud, right? Happy days, right? the tech teams. But what I've noticed, right, lately, there is a lack of, or there's a, I guess, lack of interpretation, right? So the business requirements are not getting interpreted in a way that the technology team can consume. Right,
Yes.
so maybe because of a lack of a role, right? And so this again brings to key management, right? I mean, your process policy says that, hey, key management should be done by us, but hey, you're letting the like your vendor do your key management, so they actually, even though the data is encrypted, they hold the keys, right? So is that acceptable? I mean, it's not a problem really, but is that acceptable to the business, right? So that's where the conversation begins, right? And it's fine, right, over the years and in the next iterations. So let's say you're doing this assessment, you raise these points, you've had some findings, you put obviously mitigation things in place. In the next iteration, make sure that you go back to the vendor with relevant questions, right? So that's I think that is again a learning process, and you'd probably find I guess areas where you can improve, like in different, like even in during, let's say, termination of contract, what happens to the data? Do you get access to your data, right? Things like that. So you'd obviously fine tune that requirements as you go and kind of make sure that they are addressed in your future contracts and and related documentation.
Yeah, that's really good, Swapnil. And I like how you're doing all this breakdown. You're just sharing different pieces of information that people need to be aware of, right? So we're going to open this time now to the floor to hear from you, listeners. If there are questions that come to your mind about things you want to now pick Swapnil's brain on, feel free to type the questions in. We have about 10 more minutes, which is good. So I'm just going to give you some time to pop in your questions. Okay, so while the audience are busy typing away, I thought it would be really good, Swapnil, maybe if you can also share, right? What are the top 3 things that companies can focus on when it comes to assessing or managing their third-party risk? How can they prioritize their vendors? If you can give us 3 advice.
No, sure, of course. I guess step 1 is a no-brainer, like identify your vendors. Go hunting, go bonkers. Talk to your business owners, identify all vendors, and do not just focus at the. I mean, initially, do not just focus on like I said, vendors who are having access to your networks or to your information. Just list out all the vendors. It's not going to harm you, right? I mean, just list out all the vendors, and you'd be, I guess, amazed by the amount of vendors. Ideal medium scale organization have hundreds, right? And so, I mean, again, the idea is not you again like to just I guess do assessments on those all those vendors right away, right? Step 2, I guess, put an assessment like a regime, right? Kind of identify and categorize the vendors that you identified. Categorize based on the access or information or whatever metric that the business feels is the best, right? Based on access to network, fair enough, and make sure that, right, when I say access to network and access to information system, is just not like a databases or like the web servers and websites and all that. Not really, but also focus on I think more non-traditional organizations who might have access, like for example, these organizations who do your facilities management, air conditioning and all that, right? Do they have access to the network, right? And this actually comes on from everybody must have read about the Target hack that happened, right? They had the facilities management teams or credentials were compromised basically. So make sure you address and kind of identify those vendors as well, and maybe categorize it accordingly based on what you feel is the risk, right? And then obviously I guess and for vendors, probably, for example, again, facilities management is just the physical controls aspect that you most relied on. So right, so identify all those controls for every vendor if it's easy, and then put a regime, right? Do an assessment. You can probably go full-blown comprehensive assessment on a vendor who's kind of like a managed services provider, right? He's allowing access, so you pretty much rely on a lot of controls that they apply from their end, right? Make sure, just don't rely. I think it's important to emphasize here. Just don't rely on the ISO 27001 certification. I think we've got to go above and beyond to understand the controls that they've got, and if they kind of rely, or if they are aligned rather to our expectations, right? So very important. And then I guess step 3 is pretty much like just make sure you've got that activity in the compliance calendar. The idea is again not to kind of do the assessments in a like let's say a 2-month or a 3-month period. Do not crunch it, right? Spread it across a year. Be comfortable with the process. Make sure you've got enough time to remediate and kind of come back with a more, I guess, more effective way of testing the next iteration, right? So I guess be comfortable, spread it across, and kind of have a clear, I guess, clear understanding of what is to be done next, right? So that's I think I'd probably suggest for the 3 items. Pretty straightforward, but I think effort-wise, it does kind of lead to a lot of resourcing, a lot of work.
Yeah, and a lot of times people underestimate how important it is, right, to really have an overview over all your vendors. At the same time, you have to be consistent in your approach and
Correct.
have something in place where you're actually monitoring, because so many changes happen very quickly. We are in
Correct.
this world where the landscape evolves continuously. So that's really key. And that's a
Yeah.
great way to summarize all of that. In fact, the question has just come in as well. How best can business hold vendors accountable for breaches from their weaknesses? And that's a good question.
Yeah, the good question, and I think this is something which is probably addressed like separately or differently by every organization. So, for example, again, I'm focusing on more on the logistics side of the more OT side of businesses, because because they cannot really say for the engineering services to say these achieve these certifications, but it's not the direct value for the supplier as well. So they probably go and look at like putting them into a contract, making it a contractual agreement, I think, and that's what a lot of organizations have done. I've done like a recent vendor assessment where we find a bits and pieces kind of falling apart. Not a significant issue, but what the organizations is now doing is when they go out for a renewal of certification, they're making sure that not the certification but the contract. They are making sure that those I guess controls or those requirements are kind of addressed, and they cover it from that end as well. So there's obviously multiple avenues of doing that.
Recently heard about SIG, they also fine companies that.
Yes.
So that's something that unfortunately we talk about companies being made an example of and appearing in headlines. And then
Exactly, that's everybody. I think pretty much every CIO, CISO, it's their I guess biggest nightmare of like what happens. We get out in the headlines, and that's what they want to avoid, right? Of course. So that's why I guess doing all these activities, doing all the proactive work, rather than doing it afterwards, is always helpful. So.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it has to be a carrot and stick thing, right? So, also hopefully, of companies who have done well in the industry to be made as a positive example for people to follow. So we have actually ran out of time. And time flew by quicker than expected, but I think we have actually covered quite a lot, and really appreciate you, Swapnil. I know you're very busy. You got your hands deep into a lot of different projects at the moment that's running concurrently. But thank you for taking time out during your lunchtime to just sit down with us and share about the things that you've learned. And before we wrap up this session, is there any last words you have or advice you want to leave with the rest of our audience?
Advice, I think, obviously, like vendor management is obviously an interesting topic, like when it comes to identifying risk, and then I guess managing is something very important. So like I said, the 3 steps: identify, put an assessment program in place, and then obviously put a regime around how we do it annually and kind of improve as well, like a continual improvement process there. So I think that's the best advice I can give at this point. But hey, obviously it's a vast area. There's so much to discuss. There's so much of things actually happening in the industry, and I hope obviously I was able to, I guess, give you some ideas to maybe take away from this and maybe start thinking. But obviously in 30 minutes or 20 minutes, to be honest, is not enough to cover a lot of areas. But if you've got any additional questions, feel free to hit us up on LinkedIn, or otherwise, like if it's easy to reach out to Shamane, feel free to do that, and we can absolutely have that second conversation in terms of how we approach. And I think keeping in mind a particular use case from your organization perspective, which will be, I guess, more useful.
Yeah, definitely. I know you have lots of stories, Swapnil. So this is just part 1. We have to bring you back for part 2.
Yeah, I think we can probably have a story, like sessions for storytelling of what happens in the industry, how they're dealing with it, right? So you can probably have like simple small talks and like something like that to just share, right? So definitely something good. And I think thank you, Shamane, as well for having me on this first session of our podcast series. Like I'm happy to be here, and I think in future I'd probably be able to share much more.
Oh, definitely. We'll get you back in again. And I'm seeing a lot of comments coming in, by the way. So new people are really appreciative for just sharing your thoughts and your insights and all that. So that's really good. And everyone else who are tuning in, we would love to continue having conversations with you. So if you have any questions or business concerns that you're seeing in your company and you want to just pick our brains a bit, feel free to reach out to myself or, connect with Swapnil as well on LinkedIn, or follow us on the Privasec team at the YouTube channel. we will be endeavoring to bring you more topics that are current, that are relevant, and you want to offer practical insights to you to help your company and business. So let's keep this conversation open. And in the meantime, thank you all for joining us today at your lunchtime, and we will see you at the next one. Thank you, Swapnil.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you again. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.